In this episode, we're going to show you the 3 best suspension upgrades for your A90 Toyota Supra. Today in the workshop, we have this A90 Toyota Supra for some fast road suspension upgrades. Now these upgrades that we're going to show you apply perfectly for the fast road usage because of minimal increase in MVH, and they really add to the handling characteristics for the road use. However, they're also applicable for track use, plus some other components. So in our opinion, these are the 3 best upgrades you can make to the chassis because they're perfect for the road, and then they can also be used for half road, half track and full track as you add to that mix of components. The A90 Supra is a little bit different as well to the previous Toyota Supra, mainly because effectively underneath it's a BMW. This shares exactly the same chassis as the BMW Z4 of the same generation. So underneath is something we're very used to looking at in terms of hardware. So these components that we're going to fit today will fix a lot of the issues that we're so used to seeing on the BMW chassis, but the Supra underneath is actually a lot more like an M-Lite, so an M140i, an M135i. It's that sort of suspension system underneath with big oil-filled rubber bushes and things that move around with lots of rubber in the system for comfort, which is quite surprising for something that is considered that one of the more top-tier sports cars on the road. So quite surprising to see the downgraded suspension from factory in there. So we're really looking forward to getting these parts fitted to the car to unlock more handling, more feedback, and get more grip from this chassis and make it a much more enjoyable road car. Starting from front to back, we'll start off with the solid front control arm bushes here. So these are our bushes with an aluminium housing, and they house an OEM BMW solid bush in the housing, which is fully booted and protected from any dirt or grime. So this bearing is used mainly because it doesn't increase MVH. This is a standard component in the rear of an F8X and a G8XM car, and it's there and you would not ever know it was there in terms of noise or vibration. So we repurposed that into our aluminium housing to press into this arm so that we can get some handling benefits but not get the downsides that you'd normally get by solid jointing things, which is like noise, which is commonly associated with going solid. But our components are heavily focused so that you don't notice they're there, apart from the drastic improvements in handling. The reason we fit the solid front control arm bush to the front lower control arm, so this arm is mounted at the front of the car and goes forward towards the front of the car. So this is at the very front near the front bumper, and this mounts in the hub. This arm is almost solely responsible for the behavior of the front suspension system under really heavy braking. So when we hit the brakes on the car, the tyre digs in and the chassis has momentum and wants to keep on moving. So what that results in is this bush effectively gets pulled and the car doesn't stop in line with the tyres. So the tyre stops first and the chassis wallows forward, and that can feel quite unstable and quite soft and mushy when you're really hard on the brakes. Even on the roads, you'll feel that when you really slam on, you'll just feel it really sort of move around on the nose a little bit, and that can also change the geometry, so we're getting a little bit of steering wheel movement, and if you're driving the car hard, it can just make it feel a little bit nervous, and it can just start to lose that grip from the front tyre. When we press in our solid front control arm bush, that replaces this large bush here. So this bush is oil filled as standard. So we've got the 2 rubber interfaces, but between those 2 pieces of rubber, there's actually oil in there, which is mainly there to remove all noise or vibration that could be possible from the chassis. So this is something we'd usually see on a car aimed towards comfort, not aimed towards sporty behavior. So in like a BMW 7 Series, which is just like a large saloon built for cruising down the motorway, we'd want this sort of bush on the car because it's just complete silence, we're wafting along, and we don't have to think about the road beneath us. But when we're trying to connect to the road and drive the car hard, this sort of bush actually is a big interference in steering feedback and feel, and again, all that movement under heavy braking. So although it's nice for comfort, it's not nice if you want to drive the car hard and get maximum grip out of the tyre and also get maximum feel back through the steering wheel. So with our solid bush fitted, that completely removes that unwanted flex under heavy braking. So when you hit the brakes, the tyre digs in and immediately the chassis is stopped. It can't keep on moving past where you want it when the tyre's starting to slow down. So it will just completely lock into the tyre. So as you hit the brakes, the whole car comes to a stop and it feels rigid and connected down to the ground. So it makes the car feel more locked in and more connected to the tarmac. Another thing that's actually going to give you is under really heavy braking, what that's going to generate is initial turning response. Because if you're hitting the brakes and your bushes are all moving and you're losing a bit of grip due to those geometry changes that happen when the suspension system compresses, you're actually going to get a bit of instability from the nose as the tyre is trying to find its grip again, With the solid bush fitted, there's no movement, no geometry changes, so you hit the brakes, the tyres lock into the ground, and you can get that initial turning response without that turn-in entry understeer. So it makes the whole car feel a lot more nimble and a lot more precise on initial turning. So if you're constantly changing directions, which is very common when you're doing fast road driving down a B road or even an A road, there's often very fast direction changes after braking zones as well, braking for each corner and then immediately changing direction. So with the solid bush fitted, that whole process feels a lot more precise and coordinated, and you also get that feel back through the steering wheel, because when you're turning that front suspension assembly, it's not moving around in random directions because of that bush. It's locked in, and only the toe angle and camber angles are being changed as you go through that corner. So that's a really nice upgrade to have on a road car, and also applies for track use and beyond. But again, very, very nice road upgrade, especially on a Supra with that massive oil-filled bush, which we just want to get out of the assembly so we can feel the road a little bit more and get more positivity in the nose. The next component when we're moving front to rear is the adjustable camber caster plate. So this is our Suspension Secrets Toyota Supra camber caster plate, and it features offset caster with adjustable camber. So this is arguably the most important upgrade that we're fitting today in terms of getting the car working out on the road, because the biggest holdback of this chassis as standard is a real lack of nose, a lack of front end, and push understeer mid-corner. That's where increasing the camber comes in. So this is the standard top mount that comes off the car, and as you can see, it's got two pegs here which lock into the chassis, and it is not adjustable as standard. So what we get out the factory is about negative 1.5 degrees, but we are stuck with that. So we cannot adjust that, we can't increase it, decrease it, it just is what it is, and you will find the limits of that very quickly if you're pushing hard out on track. Just to show you exactly why that's the case, I'm just going to grab one of the wheels from this car, and I'll just demonstrate exactly why we're trying to get more camber on the front of this Supra for fast road use. So this is one of the front wheels off the Supra behind me, and so what we're trying to talk about here is that when we have about negative 1.5 degrees of camber, we're leaning the top of the tyre in very slightly. So we've got some negative, which is good, but not enough. So as we're driving hard and we go through the corner, what we're going to be doing is loading the tyre as we go through. So if we're turning around a left-hander, and this is our front right, as we go through the corner, the car's going to lean over onto the contact patch, but then at 1.5 degrees, it's going to start leaning back off again. And this is where the mid-corner understeer comes in, which is felt so strongly in this chassis. So the reason for that is we go into the corner, we start loading the tyre, so we're not at the middle of the corner yet, we're just turning in at this point, just starting to transfer the mass over to that outside tyre. But then where it starts to be required and starts to actually get important to have the grip in the mid-corner section, that's where we start to fall back off the tyre, because we're continuing the load transfer, and then it's got too much for the camber that's there, and we're already falling back off, and it turns into a positive camber. This means that we've lifted up the inside edge of the tyre, and we've got minimal tyre in contact with the ground, leading to a reduction in grip, which therefore pushes the nose and causes that understeer. So what we need to do is fit something like our adjustable camber caster plate, which increases the negative camber as standard. So with the negative camber increase like this, we're already in a position where we've got more tyre leaned over at the top. So as we come into the corner, we're going to go into the corner entry, and we're starting to lean onto it, but not fully just yet. And the goal here is that to be at the mid-corner apex section, have all of that tyre in contact with the ground. This completely maximises grip at the apex and allows us to get into the corner with confidence, lean on that nose and really push the pace of the car through the corner, trusting that the front of the car isn't just going to wash out at the limit of grip. So the negative camber addition is really important to achieve that. Now our camber plates also increase caster. So caster is something that a lot of people don't like to adjust or don't want to adjust. So in our camber plates, we actually machine that into the camber plate. So it's a fixed offset of caster increase. It's as much as we can get in there before the spring gets too close to the turret, for example. So we've packaged as much in as we can, but still perfectly comfortable to use with the standard suspension assembly, the spring and damper, or an aftermarket coilover unit. Anything like that is perfectly fine to use in that space available. But what the caster does is twofold. One, it helps with our earlier problem of steering, feel and feedback. So increasing the caster increases something called mechanical trail, which effectively gives more feel and feedback and torque resistance through the steering wheel. So as a driver, when you turn that steering wheel, it has a bit more weight to it. So it feels like you know more where your wheels are pointing before they get there. Whereas standard, without the caster and with the rubber bushes, it feels quite vague, and what you end up doing is sort of turning the steering wheel in and waiting for the car to respond before you really know where that front end is, and you either down more lock-in or feed more lockout, which isn't a very nice way to drive. You don't feel very in tune with the chassis, but with an additional caster increase, that added weight through the steering makes you feel more in tune with the chassis. As you turn that wheel, you know where the car's going because you can feel the movement through the steering and you know exactly where that car's going to be placed. So it increases that driver feedback and that driving joy a little bit as well. But what it does on an actual physical level is it gives something called dynamic camber gain. So what that is before we talked about increasing our negative camber, so as we're going through the corner, it gives us something to lean onto. What dynamic camber gain does is it means that as we actually physically turn the steering wheel, it also increases that negative camber. The benefit of this means we can run a little bit less static camber than we otherwise would have to, which means that in a straight line we get even more improved braking traction, we get better throttle traction if it's front wheel drive, for example, but in this case we'll get better braking traction, especially in wet conditions. But what it means is as we turn the steering wheel, it's going to camber gain and increase negative camber to give us that contact patch to lean onto. The beauty of this is that when we're talking about negative camber and getting the front axle to work properly, we're always talking about getting it to work at about the apex, which is where you've got the most amount of steering lock dialed in. So what the caster does is it gives us the camber when the steering is turned, when we need it the most. So rather than just having it all the time in a straight line where we don't really need the camber in a straight line, we want less, if anything, to increase our braking traction. But where we need it through the corner, it's there due to the caster. So having this combination in the top mount of camber and caster gives us this perfect blend of geometry so that we can get much better braking traction. We're not removing from that at all, but through the corner, we're getting that increase in negative. So we're getting that increase in grip and reducing the understeer. So it's win-win in that sense because we're effectively keeping the car really usable, really friendly on the road in all conditions. But then when we want to push hard on that fast road drive, that B-road blast, or just giving it a really quick, nice drive, we're getting the grip from the front axle through the additional camber due to the caster and the additional negative camber to really improve the front end. So it's the perfect fast road upgrade because we don't really have to compromise in any of the areas there to get what we're looking for from the nose. So our camber plates come with this spherical bearing in the top mount here. That is perfectly applicable for both street and for track use. The reason for that is because we've gone to quite large lengths to get a bearing that does not knock and does not increase noise. The only thing you'll get is a very slight increase in tyre noise, which is absolutely minimal, but what it does mean is that there's no knocking or excessive vibration coming via the top mount, so we can fit it to a road car and not have those commonly associated downsides because the quality of the bearing that we choose, we use rotor ball bearings in here, are the highest quality bearings we could put into this top mount. They're also one of the largest bearings on the market in this application. We've designed this bearing to withstand forces that this car should never see. I mean, the forces this bearing can take, the car definitely can't. So we're never going to be in a position where we're forcing this bearing into knocking. And even if it was ever to knock, they're covered by our full lifetime warranty. So even if these ever did fail, if it was to happen, just get in touch and we'd replace those bearings for you free of charge. It's as simple as that. We've got this bearing on our camber plates fitted to our F80 M3. We're 2 years into driving that pretty hard now on track and road, and there's still absolutely no noise increase from that car. So we're very, very confident in our bearing choices. And it also means that even on the road, you get that improvement in damper response due to the spherical bearing. Because if you put a rubber bush in there, like in the standard top mount, what you actually get is when the damper goes into compression, it flexes that rubber top hat before it actually uses the damper valve in. But when you put a spherical bearing on the top of the shaft, it immediately activates the damper valve, and so you get much better damper response out on the road when you're hitting compressions or going through the corner, rather than having that movement in the rubber bush and then the damper moving. So you get much better suspension response, much better suspension behavior, but none of the downsides that are commonly associated with gaining from that. The final upgrade we're going to be fitting today is our Suspension Secrets adjustable rear tow arm. So this arm has quite a few different benefits, and it's a very common choice on the BMW platform across the board, even for road use, and it's very commonly fitted for two main reasons. The first is geometry. So when we're setting these cars up, we're aiming to get something usually above negative 1.8 at the rear, even on the roads, so we can have a nice contact patch at the back to lean onto and avoid sort of a hopping and a skipping through the corner as we come off a tyre that doesn't have enough camber. So when we get to about negative 1.8 or beyond, we actually get into a window where we can lean onto that tyre through the corner and maintain grip, and we're not falling back off like we previously described with the front wheel. However, on the majority of BMW chassis, especially the M Lights, which this car is much more akin to, you actually need an adjustable tow arm in order to get that level of rear camber. This is because the standard adjustment with an eccentric rear camber bolt and an eccentric rear tow bolt, the windows of adjustment between the two aren't high enough. So when you increase your camber past a certain point, you could no longer actually get tow in, which at the back of a BMW, which is rear-wheel drive in most cases, and at the back of the Supra, which is rear-wheel drive, you need to have rear tow in. If you have tow out, it's going to be very unstable, it's going to oversteer on turning and be very, very snappy to drive. So we fit this adjustable rear tow arm so that we can set our rear camber wherever we intend to set it without the limitation of tow. So when we fit this arm, we can set our rear camber exactly where we need it to get that grip through the corner, but then we can set our tow back exactly where we want it without having to compromise on any of those settings. So that's why it's a really, really nice upgrade. So we're not limited by what the car has to offer. Similar to the front with the camber plate, it just unlocks that window of adjustment so we can just put exactly what we want to see onto that car. The second major benefit of this arm is that in the standard arm, at each end, we have two rubber bushes. Similar to the front control arm bush, this flexes when it's in use. However, this is in use through the corner, and at the rear end, it can actually lead to quite a lot of instability, mainly at high speed cornering. So the faster you go through a corner, the more load is getting put through that tyre due to higher G-force, and therefore more flex occurs in the arm. So that's actually the complete opposite of the scenario you'd want in a car, where the faster you're going, the more unstable the rear axle becomes. So that's something we want to completely eradicate and completely fix by fitting our rear tow arm. So by fitting our rear tow arm, it's got rose joints on both ends, which replace these rubber bushes. So when ours is fitted to the back axle and it goes through the corner, there is no flex, there is no movement. This means that whatever settings we set in terms of rear tow, as that force is applied through our tow arm, there's no movement in it, therefore no tow change from the tow arm. So this means we have much more stability, much more confidence in the chassis because we've got the same tow setting and the same feel from the rear end at slow, medium and high speed corners. Whereas with this arm fitted, a slow speed corner would feel much closer to the settings we set. A mid-speed corner, you'd start to get that movement. And then a high-speed corner, this is deflected quite a lot and we've got completely different tow settings to what we actually set on the car. So not something that's nice to drive at all, particularly on the roads where you do encounter constantly changing speed corners, whereas with our tow arm fitted, you get that consistency. Again, similar to our camber plates, the rose joints we use, again, are spec'd exactly for purpose and then higher than they need to be. So we use a fluoro rose joint, which is a lot larger than the joints used in the BMW Motorsport builds, but the same brand. So we're going for the best quality bearings on the market, but we're always upsizing them due to the force input so that we know they're not going to fail. And again, if they ever were to fail, they are again covered by our lifetime warranty. So if there was any play in them whatsoever, we'd just replace those bearings for you free of charge. So it's a real win-win situation where you get to unlock all that adjustment, you get to remove that flex from the rear axle, but you know you're not going to get those knocking noises commonly associated with lower quality rose joints, and you're going to get all those benefits on a perfect application for fast road use. So with the three components fitted to the car, we've unlocked a lot more grip, reduced the understeer substantially, and we've got so much more stability under heavy braking so that we're getting a much better package of a car, something that's more like a Supra, for example, a sports car. We're going to unlock the handling that you would imagine it came out the factory with, which unfortunately it doesn't. But with these parts fitted, you're going to benefit from those handling upgrades without getting the common associated drawbacks such as noise increase, vibration or harshness, also known as NVH. So with these parts fitted, barely any noise increase whatsoever. You don't notice they're there in that sense, but when you hit that corner or hit that brake pedal, you know they're there because of that massive improvement in handling response. We've now got all of those three suspension upgrades fitted to this Supra, and we've now got it rigged up on our flat patch for a full geometry alignment. It's really important that when you're fitting suspension upgrades to have a geometry alignment carried out after the installation. This is for two reasons. One, fitting things that adjust things like camber, knock out other settings like tow, so you can't just increase your camber because your tow angle will be really knocked out from where it was before. So the geometry will always need resetting when any suspension upgrade is installed. Even the front control arm bushes, you should get it geoed again because bits have been removed and reinstalled. They'll be in slightly different places than they were before. So always best practice to have a geometry alignment done. In terms of the actual settings, if you purchase the parts from us, we actually work with you and we provide a full suspension setup sheet with our recommended settings for you, your car, your tyres that you're using, and also the suspension upgrades that you have fitted to the car. We will recommend the best settings for your usage. In terms of actually getting the right settings on the car, especially if you're at track as well, we've actually previously just done a video showing how to get to those numbers and what sort of techniques to use to measure if your camber is correct, and also how to dial in your tow settings based on how the car is feeling, and also by observing how the tyre is wearing as well. We will be going into more detail on some of that stuff in future videos as well. So there you have it, the 3 best suspension upgrades for your Toyota Supra. These work perfectly for fast road use, but they also help get the car dialed in if you want to take it on track as well. It's a really nice starting point and a really cost-effective upgrade package to get your car much better on the roads and even better out on track. If there's anything you've liked in this video, get in touch and we'll be happy to help you build a package for your car and your needs. Alternatively, head over to the website and have a look at our wide suspension offerings on there. And if you want any more information on setup, head over to our other website, suspensionsecrets.co.uk, which is full of articles and information, so you can dial your setting perfectly as well.